welcome to the Cultivate Wellness Podcast. This is your host, Brad Swail. Today's episode, I speak with Shane Dowd of gotrom.com, that's G-O-T-R-O-M, and the faifix.com. By the way, I'm recording this intro in March after all the coronavirus lockdown, so I'm hiding under my covers to prevent outside sound. So I know this intro is going to sound a little bit weird, but the conversation with Shane sounds totally normal. It was recorded, I think, back in January, so never fear. But yeah, so we talk a lot about exercise and the importance of mechanics and being mindful and empathetic toward yourself and your process. And Shane's obviously very knowledgeable. And since we're all sitting at home, not really doing anything, now's a great time to focus on mechanics, taking a step back from all the heavy lifting and things like that. So check out his websites. He also has a YouTube channel, which is linked to on his website. So go check all that stuff out. I love speaking with him, and I look forward to keeping up with him and learning more about what he does. As always, we're sponsored by People's RX, Austin's favorite pharmacy. You can find them at peoplesrx.com. You can't go to their stores right now because, well, I guess you could. It's curbside, but whatever. peoplesrx.com. Our website, cultivatewellnesspodcast.com, and on Instagram at Cultivate Wellness Podcast. Share with friends so they can learn too. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you could, go to project8p.org. It is the nonprofit that I am involved with that is looking for therapies or cures for patients with 8p chromosome abnormalities, like my son Lachlan. I know everyone is having tough times right now. If you have a few extra bucks, maybe consider donating to them. It'll definitely go a long way. So with that, let's cultivate wellness. All right, I am here with Shane Dowd of gotrom.com, and that's Gotrom.com, and the faifix.com. Shane, how are you?
I'm doing excellent, Brad. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you for joining us all the way from Colombia. The great thing about podcasts and the internet is we get to talk to people all over the world, and hopefully people all over the world will discover this. So, what are you doing in Colombia?
My wife is Colombian. She's from Medellin, and she's got a good job here, and I work online. So I said, yeah, let's go live in Colombia for a while, and I'll learn some Spanish.
How's that going, learning Spanish?
Muy bien, gracias.
That's about the extent of my Spanish, so don't go further than that.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, you're kind of living that life that, that modern life that I think a lot of people sort of dream of, working for yourself, working online, and being able to take your job wherever you want. And I mean, from everything I've heard about Colombia, it's a very beautiful place. And so, it seems like you're living the dream.
I have a pretty good life. I'm very happy with it. Yeah. The nature, the beauty. Yeah. Yeah. But prior, I was kind of doing the strength and conditioning coach, personal training thing in a gym. And I was a massage therapist and corrective exercise kind of person in a gym setting. And slowly and surely, I kind of, poco a poco, little by little, I transitioned into this sort of online world.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself, sort of your history, how you got into, hip impingements, injuries, fixing people's flexibility, mobility, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a lot of people, like we teach the things that we most needed to learn. So I probably have accumulated more injuries than the average person. And I started out probably way less flexible than the average person. And at some point back in 2011, when a major back injury happened to me, I was doing a power clean in a gym. I have it on video actually. And I massively injured my back. I couldn't hardly walk. I was having my girlfriend at the time put on my socks and shoes. And I realized that even though I had a very good background in lifting biomechanics and how to lift weights correctly, if the car is out of alignment, even if you drive it perfectly, it can still kind of blow up and have problems. So I realized as I started diving into the world of physical therapy and yoga and stretching and mobility and flexibility that I had all of these out of alignments and asymmetries in my body. And so all this fitness that I was doing, I was just basically putting fitness on top of dysfunction, and it caught up with me at some point. And so this led to a long exploration of the worlds of physical therapy and yoga and stretching and mobility, and found Kelly Starrett, if anyone's familiar with him, and got into deep tissue massage. And I became a massage therapist after that, where I had previously just been a personal trainer and a strength and conditioning coach. And basically I sort of transformed from a fitness guy into a healer, into someone that helps people fix injuries and get flexible. And then I specifically, with the femoral acetabular impingement, the hip impingement, when that back injury happened to me, the root cause of it was this asymmetry in my hips. I've got cam morphology, a weird bone shape in my hip, and a labral tear and a cyst and all this bad stuff in my hips. And I needed to learn how to work around that, how to heal it, how to fix it. And so after all that exploration, I started, you figure something out, and then the natural thing to do is turn around and start helping other people that are dealing with similar things. So that's kind of what I started doing.
So it sounds like you and I actually have a pretty similar history. I was, I started out being overly flexible, very mobile, but not very stable. And I was still, pushing myself, obviously trying to lift as much weight as possible and, gain as much strength. And I would do, for some reason I thought that if I was hyperextending my back when I was doing things like squats or deadlifts, then I must be protecting my back. Like I'm really activating those muscles. And what that ended up doing was just throwing my hips out constantly. And every so often I would get just this extreme low back pain, could barely walk, would screw up my gait and everything. And, somehow I learned, I don't remember the exact process. I was surrounded by very intelligent trainers, I guess. And I learned that it's a neutral spine, that I was extending my back too much, my low back, my lumbar, and that was creating this impingement. And then once I had to basically start from scratch, just start doing very low weight, getting those mechanics down correct. And the back pain has been almost non-existent. Of course, slight injuries happen every so often, but nothing related to that and in forever. So tell people a little bit about the importance of mechanics. You were talking about if you drive a car that's misaligned, and I'm sort of thinking about getting your tires rotated and balanced and stuff like that on a regular basis. If you don't do that, then something's going to happen. You're going to get a tire blowout, or I don't know what. Maybe I'm not a car guy, but sort of start from basics and talking about the importance of mechanics and maybe even posture.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, what I teach when I help people with injuries or with flexibility or mobility or how to lift weights in the gym safely, when you learn things, you try to boil it down to the simplest principles that you can find. And for me, that is, I call it the TSR system, which is tissue work, stretching, and re-education. That's basically self-massage and stretching, and then motor control or strengthening. And what you're pointing to is the motor control aspect of kind of being a healthy, well-rounded human being and athlete. So yeah, like what you talked about with kind of the overarching of your back is a very common thing that you see in any gym setting when you see people squatting, if it's in a CrossFit gym, powerlifting, bodybuilding, whatever, because that's a cue that has worked for a lot of people where if you just arch your back really hard, then you kind of feel like you're locked out and you're stable. And oftentimes you can lift a whole lot of weight that way, but with enough repetitions where your spinal segments are kind of jammed at end range, not everyone can buffer that. And I certainly was not someone that could buffer that could deal with that kind of biomechanics for very long. And it sounds like you weren't either.
Yeah.
And more modern kind of physical therapy thinking or research. I don't know if people are familiar with a guy named Dr. Stuart McGill, who's one of the world's premier low back researchers. He's really popularized and brought to the fore the importance of neutral spine while lifting heavy things. It doesn't mean that your spine can't ever go into flexion and extension and rotation and stuff like that. But when lifting things, braced neutral is the safest position. and that's fine to know, but to actually develop the motor control and the self-awareness to be in a braced neutral spine position when deadlifting, when lunging, when squatting, when snatching, when cleaning, when doing all of these things in CrossFit and in the gym, that's another thing that takes a lot of practice. And that's a lot of what I focus on in my programs about back pain or in the FAI Fix program, because if someone has hip impingement and they're accustomed to going into a huge anterior pelvic tilt, meaning sticking your butt out and arching your back, which is kind of how you were describing your squat.
Yeah.
That causes earlier hip impingement, and then people are not only irritating their backs potentially, but also grinding away on their hips. So I do a lot of work with people to teach them what is a proper posture, what is a proper biomechanic for all the things that you do in the gym, and then of course in daily life too. But gym, there's a higher risk because you're driving the car faster, so to speak. You're lifting heavier things, and
you're towing more
air.
You're towing a lot more than what you do in your daily life. But I mean, even still, you hear about people that injure their back just picking up a garden hose or something like that. I mean, it's not because the garden hose is heavy. It's because there's just this lifelong pattern, maybe not lifelong, but a chronic pattern of poor mechanics, and then it's just something gives in that moment, and then you can't move.
Exactly.
So, you brought up the concept of bracing, and a lot of people think of it as just, holding your breath, holding your breath, taking a deep breath and holding it. But it's a lot more than that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like to teach kind of a several step sequence where first you kind of squeeze your butt to kind of set a neutral pelvic position. Because if you try to just get tight and braced from an already arched and overextended position, you can't brace very effectively. People can experiment with this for themselves by just standing up, arching your back and sticking your butt out, and then trying to brace your abs, versus standing tall, kind of tucking your tail or squeezing your butt and then trying to brace your abs. And usually you can kind of get much more braced in that way. So first you kind of set the pelvic position, you squeeze your butt and then you squeeze your gut, you kind of brace your abs. And then you can kind of go into your movement like that. Usually there's also a breathing component where you squeeze your butt, brace your abs, deflate all your air, and then brace your abs even harder, reinflate. And it's kind of like, this might be a little bit hard to describe on audio, but it's kind of like creating a shrink-wrapped steel canister and then putting compressed air in there. And then that kind of stabilizes your spine a little bit better. But yeah, it's first setting the pelvic position and then getting braced. And then also knowing that there's other subtle details as well, like your chin position, your cervical position. If I kind of have a braced neutral spine, but then I start going into my squat and I throw my chin up, meaning I kind of jut my chin out like a chicken, my lumbar spine, my low back is likely to follow. So knowing that your cervical position also affects your low back position is another kind of subtle point.
Yeah, and that's, that point is that it's all sort of connected. Like if you do something, doing something with your cervical spine is going to potentially change something that you're doing with your lumbar spine, whether you are, consciously aware of it or not. Like there's a shoulder issue might relate to something going on in your right shoulder might be actually related to something going on with your left foot, which might actually be something related to the weight, or your left hip, which might be related to something going on in your feet. And it's all totally. This mechanical, you're a mechanical beast that is, if everything is not aligned and working properly, and I mean, maybe it's not that serious, just for daily life, you don't necessarily need, everything to be exactly right. But when you are pushing yourself to lift and do these explosive movements, being as close to perfect as possible is going to prevent you from being, in the chiropractor's office, or, maybe you get massages for other reasons, but going to the masseuse on a regular basis, it's going to prevent you from being in pain so much.
Right.
So, since it is all connected, what are your thoughts on footwear? Everyone, especially women, wear crazy footwear when they're out and about. I mean, they're, 4-inch stilettos. Not everyone, even 1-inch heel or something like that is going to be, it's going to put your body in a weird position. It's going to lift the butt, tilt the hips, extend the chest. Even men have typical dress shoes or daily shoes are going to have like a very thick sole. Your feet aren't doing all the work. Your basically wearing like a casket on your shoe that's just stabilizing everything, and your feet get weak. To me, I think that's where most people need to start, is look at their footwear and find something more, I want to say minimal, but that's not appropriate for everybody, but that's what I would do. I would start with a minimal footwear and then start moving on to, strengthening through a natural foot position.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we evolved for millions and millions of years to be basically barefoot. So it makes sense that something trending towards more minimal, is probably a good idea. But of course, it depends on the person, depends on how accustomed they are to wearing big blocky shoes. Like, there's been probably many examples of people that heard, oh, minimalist footwear is good, and then they jumped right into it and started running miles and miles on pavement in minimalist footwear after having been wearing giant shoes for their whole life, and they end up with shin splints and plantar fasciitis and all kinds of problems. So I think it's highly individual. There's not like this footwear is the best. It's a matter of either seeking out expert in biomechanics and gait, like some kind of running coach or podiatrist or physical therapist, or someone who can really guide you towards a footwear that works for you, and maybe help you integrate something more minimal or more zero drop, without the giant heel, because obviously that's just a weird biomechanic for the human body to have your heels elevated. So experiment on your own and slowly integrate things that are more zero drop or minimalist. And if you can, work with an expert who can help guide that process, is kind of some of my thinking on footwear.
So what do you, clients come to you, they find you online. What is the more common mistake, or, a common place for people to start? Let's say someone's listening to this right now. They want to improve their mechanics, their range of motion, stuff like that. What could they do to start today? Do you think that most people would be able to accomplish?
Usually it's very specific. Like, people come to me and they say, I have back pain.
Yeah.
And I realize that most people don't want to start a general health practice. Like, you should start going to yoga every day, and you should start going to the gym every day. They want something specific that's specifically going to fix their problem. And then hopefully that opens the door for them to slowly see the big picture of, oh, I need a life practice, a body maintenance practice, a movement practice, something that keeps me feeling and moving good. And that can include a little bit of strengthening, a little bit of stretching, a little bit of tissue work, or self-massage, self-myofascial release. Ideally, some combination of all three of those, I think. But because I know that people initially want something that's very targeted to their specific issue, and once they see some good results with that, then they can open themselves up to just a general kind of body maintenance practice. I have different videos on YouTube or different programs on my website specifically about, say, pain in your hips, or pain in your back, or shoulder mobility, or how to do the splits, or different things that are very specific to different people's goals. And then they can kind of check that box, fix that back pain, and then they're like, oh, this mobility work that I've been doing is really interesting. I like that my hips move and feel better now. I'm going to continue doing a general mobility practice, a general body maintenance practice.
Yeah. So before it's too late, I meant to ask you this earlier, but tell me, what was your back injury? What happened to you? You just sort of blew over it. If you were having your girlfriend at the time put on your socks for you, well, that's very kind of her. Obviously, I'm not sure that my wife would do that, but she would do that. But what was the diagnosis? Was it that femoral acetabular impingement? Is that what that is?
Yeah, it's a mouthful. Yeah, basically it was that. It was I actually, because I have the moment of my injury on video, you can see that I have a perfectly braced neutral spine, just like you're supposed to have. But because I had this massive asymmetry in my right hip has the weird bone shape. And not only that, but it's not just the bone. That's one of the things that I help teach people, is that yes, the bone matters to a degree, but it's also the tightness that develops in all of the muscles. So basically my right hip was very different than my left hip, and it was moving very differently. And because of that, on a very subtle, deep level in my back, I was kind of twisted or torqued. And when I was doing a power clean, an Olympic lift, ended up hurting myself. So yeah, the root cause of that was the femoral acetabular impingement, the hip impingement.
So is that a common thing? I mean, you have a whole website dedicated to it. So, I mean, obviously, it is going to be, I mean, I've personally never heard of it, but I mean, that's it could be one of those things that a lot of people have that they just don't know.
Yeah, surprisingly, I was surprised when I started talking about it and making videos about it on YouTube. And people were like, I have that too, and I've got that problem too. And I was working in a CrossFit gym at the time, and I started seeing more and more people that have some asymmetry in their hips. If you have an asymmetry in your hips, it doesn't mean you have femoral acetabular impingement. Like we try to fight like whenever someone says you have femoral acetabular impingement, people freak out and think they're like doomed for life and they've got this, it's like having cancer or something. But the human body is not perfectly symmetrical. And so to think that both of your hips should and always will be perfectly spherical ball and socket joints is not very realistic. Like our organs aren't symmetrical within our body. There's all kinds of asymmetries within our body. But yeah, it's surprisingly more common than you'd think. And when I started realizing there was a lot of, like I came out of my problems with the hip thing, I restored my hip mobility, got rid of my pain, realized that there was a lot of other people that had this specific issue. Especially I think it's a combination because we've all lived a very sedentary lifestyle as a generality. And then there's these new high intensity exercise like CrossFit, like people getting into things that they haven't been preparing for, but then they just jump right into high intensity exercise. Yeah. And it's kind of like the car's been sitting in the garage for years and it's all out of alignment. And then you start racing at 100 miles an hour and obviously stuff starts to break down. So yeah, it is more common than you'd expect.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves is, I live in Austin. There's a big fitness culture here, and we have trails, and people are always jogging and running. And I'll be driving down the street and see people running that they're just not. You can tell they're out of alignment. They should not be running. They should be working on something that they, strengthening, working on that range of motion. Like their feet do that weird thing where they're like, egg beaters almost, like, flailing out and landing in weird positions. And, more power to them. I'm happy that they're trying to get fit, improve their health, but they're setting themselves up for disaster. And so it's hard to know as an individual without background in this sort of stuff, what is supposed to be happening. What am I? Clearly, they don't know that their feet are doing something weird that they're not supposed to be doing. And they're, like you said, they're running on pavement. Maybe they're in some minimal shoes. Maybe they're in shoes that are way too big, like those Hokas or whatever. I don't know. And it's very frustrating to see that. But how can? Is it safe to assume that most people are just sort of out of alignment and something needs to be done before they start a fitness regimen? Or is it, just take it easy at first and just be cognizant of your body? Like what's some general advice that people can take away?
I mean, in an ideal world, everyone would be able to work with a really qualified, like, personal trainer or just a guide to help them move in a proper way. Like I was just at the gym earlier with my wife, and I'm teaching her how to pick things up safely. Like she was setting down some dumbbells and she rounded her back and then twisted to the side to like set down the dumbbells. And I was like, don't ever do that again. Like, until you've learned where your body can go. Like I can set things down with a rounded back because I've picked things up and set things down with a perfectly braced neutral spine trillions of times. And so I've done tons of yoga and forward folding and Jefferson curls. And I know where my end ranges are that are safe for me. But someone who's just getting into it doesn't know where those are yet. And so of course today she kind of told me like, yeah, my back actually hurts a little bit. And I was like, yeah, well, the pain is a good teacher. But for people because we want to avoid two extremes. Neither do we want to tell people you're not allowed to exercise until all your biomechanics and mobility are perfect. because that's unachievable. No one's ever going to get there, and then they're never going to start. They're never going to even start jogging or start going to the gym, because first they have to do a million corrective exercises, and that's kind of silly in my mind. So that's one extreme. But the other extreme is just go from sitting at a desk for your whole life to jumping into full speed CrossFit. That's the other extreme. So with the age of the internet, there's so much information, some of it good, some of it bad. But people can start to join a gym, start to run. If they're noticing, I feel off, I feel asymmetrical, I feel pain, you can go on Shane's YouTube, or you can go on a million other really quality websites and figure out, okay, maybe it's because I'm lacking range of motion here, and then you start maybe a stretching practice, or you do a little bit of foam rolling or myofascial release, and you start to try to self-treat, take a crack at fixing your own pain and injuries. Obviously, it'd be great if you had the expert guidance of someone the whole way, but not everyone has the funds or the availability, or there's no one in their area that's good. So I would say do the best that you can to be mindful about starting an exercise routine. Try to literally walk before you run. Don't just say, I'm going to start, running 8 miles a day on pavement, and I haven't ran in years. Don't jump into heavy max effort powerlifting or weightlifting if you're not accustomed to that. Like, treat it as a very slow ramp up. Do the mobility work that's become more and more popular, and that'll help. Kind of mobility work to me is kind of like tuning up the car while you race it. Yeah. So those are a couple recommendations.
You brought up your YouTube a couple of times, and I mentioned your websites, but what's your YouTube channel?
If you just search GOTROM, GOTROM, then you'll find it on YouTube.
Okay, cool. So, for me, I generally, when people ask me advice, I generally start with their hips. And when I was a trainer, that's a lot of the times where I would start. I would generally start with the hip hinge, making sure that their glutes are firing, protecting that, which will in turn protect their knees. And if they don't have the range of motion in their ankles and stuff like that, we can work around that. We can do half squats and stuff like that if we really need to, until their ankle range of motion is corrected. But their hips, if their glutes aren't firing to protect the hips and to protect the knees, then you're going to get, I think to me, it just seemed more likely and far more common, especially like you're talking about a sedentary lifestyle, you're constantly sitting all the time, that's a good place for people to start. And, but it's sort of gotten to this other, and a very common thing that I could do back then was doing the hip thrusters, setting yourself up on a parallel to the ground with your knees bent at a 90-degree angle or 45-degree angle. 90-degree angle? Anyhow.
An angle.
Yeah, an angle. And, having a bar laying across your pelvis and coming down and then thrusting your hips up, really getting those glutes firing. And now people are doing that, they have machines specifically for that because it became such a popular exercise. Well, because it strengthens your ass and everyone wants to have a good-looking ass. That's what I want. I want that too. I want my wife to think that I look good in my underwear. Absolutely, for sure. But, then you get you get to the other end of the spectrum of being, maybe you've created another asymmetry where now your ass is just way too strong and your hamstrings or your quads may not have caught up. And it's just this roller coaster, or, this wheel in fitness of, what becomes popular then becomes the problem. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's very frustrating. And seeing people, with hips, I was at the gym last night and seeing some older women doing some snatches, and I think it's awesome that they're out there doing, strengthening their bodies at that age, and overall their form looked great, but I could tell every single time they came down in that deep squat, their knee was caving in. And it's not my place. I'm not their trainer. I'm just another guy at the gym. I don't want to step in that trainer's, step on his toes and advise his clients or whatever. But it's still it's another thing. It's very frustrating. I don't know if you get that same thing. When you're at the gym and you see someone doing something wrong, do you correct them?
No, Lord, no. No, I mean, one, that would be, there's not many people that can receive that feedback. I mean, yeah, if it's like maybe someone I know, or
Sure.
there's some relationship there, or they're really going to hurt themselves, I might step in. But no, I mean, this is like the bane of every physical therapist or trainer who really knows their stuff. Stepping into a gym is, it's just like watching car wrecks all around you.
Yeah.
um, but no, I mean, I think what you're pointing at is a lack of education, and I wish that there was, I don't know, some process that every trainer needed to go through to learn that it's not okay that your knee collapses into valgus towards the other knee extremely while you're doing a squat, or it's not okay that your back rounds when you're doing a deadlift. It's not okay that your back is hyper arched when you're doing a squat. It's not okay that your shoulders internally rotate into that sort of like hunchback, rounded Quasimodo posture when you're doing push-ups, or, you know, all kinds of things. But I think it's just a matter of, because there's no grand certifying body that can train personal trainers to have an eye like a physical therapist, then we just have to do the best with our clients and do the best with people that come to us for education, for mentorship, and then just try to spread it from there. But yeah, it's painful sometimes walking into a public gym.
Yeah. For me, I think it's the advice to maybe for people to start with is perfect your compound movements first before you go into isolation movements. You know, perfect your squat or get close to perfect before you go into doing, hip thrusters or, leg extensions, or, do the leg extensions at the end of the workout or something like that, and really focus on getting all of the major muscle groups, those multi joint movements, squats, deadlifts, the if you're doing Olympic snatches, stuff like that. Get those down, start those first, and make sure that they're perfect before you go on to, getting a giant butt from doing hip thrusters. Because then you are going to create the you're going to end up on the other end of the spectrum of having something way too powerful, way too strong, and other stuff not quite there. And I mean, I was having that issue with, I recognized when I play a lot of soccer. I recognized that when I'm playing soccer, my quads are just weaker than my hamstrings and my glutes. And I could also, the writing was on the wall. I just never really put two and two together. My deadlift was disproportionately stronger than my squats. And so, I've taken the time over the past couple months to really up my squats, and they're starting to get a little bit better, a little bit more in parity. I mean, it's not 1-to-1. Deadlift should be heavier, I think, in general. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not only do I think my legs look better now, but they're also way more functional. Mm-hmm. And I think functionality should be people's goal, because if you're functional, then you probably look good. I think. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think if people would be well served. I wish this was taught in, like, I don't know, grade school or something, like how to hip hinge, how to squat, deadlift, lunge, push, and pull with good form. Like if you mastered those basic patterns, and then of course you can explore into all kinds of interesting movements. Like, it's not like we need to be brace neutral spine when we're running, kicking, tumbling, doing gymnastics and stuff like that, but they are very kind of fundamental patterns. How do you pick something up off the ground with good mechanics that is safe? How do you just build, double leg, bilateral leg strength, a squat? How do you when you play a sport, you're very often in a lunge position. So it'd be good to have trained thousands of repetitions to be strong and stable and have enough flexibility to get into a good lunge shape. And then, with the upper body pushing and pulling, there's a proper way and a improper way to do that. So I think that if people spent more time on the basics and really mastered them, they'd be well served by that. And of course, I do think that because we have lived in a very sedentary society, that there is a place for so-called corrective exercises. Like, I'm a quote unquote corrective exercise specialist. I'm a little iffy on the term, because I think that, like you said, like things that have become trendy, like corrective exercise, like foam rolling, can end up causing more problems because the pendulum swings too far in the direction of, oh, you need to do 1,000,000 corrective exercises before you even attempt to squat. Not so much. You need to foam roll for 30 minutes before you start your workout, and then you're actually not warmed up. You're not hot and sweaty before you start working out, and then you get injured. No. So I just think people should focus more on the basics, and then add the corrective exercises and the mobility work as and when needed, as like a spice to the meal rather than the main thing.
Yeah, I think if you're doing 30 minutes of foam rolling before you even exercise, then you have bigger problems than. I mean, I don't know how people or why people do that. Why do they have so much time? I mean, that's something's going on. That if you need that much foam rolling, it really shouldn't. I mean, I remember when foam rolling sort of exploded, and yeah, it feels great. It feels great to roll your spine up it, get a few cracks. It's like a light massage, and you do it on your quads, and maybe it hurts a little bit, but it's that sort of like good pain. But then you try, you do that, you get the little impingements that might be there, you get them out, and then you move straight into the exercises that you're preparing for. Because I think the foam roller, it'll get rid of those impingements, or it'll help sort of smooth things out a little bit, but you have to then turn around and use it, or you'll just sort of go back to where, point A, where you began.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And
you definitely need, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to say that you definitely need to, if you do foam rolling, or I think foam rolling is kind of like a 101 version of tissue work. Like there's much more in-depth, precise ways of doing tissue work on the body, which is kind of a big component of what I teach, how to go way, way beyond foam rolling. But I think that if you do tissue work and you stretch and stuff like that prior to a workout or at another time, you then need to go use that new range of motion that you just gained, that new joint mobility, through full ranges of motion, like full range squatting and deadlifting and lunging and all that stuff, to sort of cement in and train your mind-muscle connection, train your brain that, okay, this is my new usable range of motion. So it's important that you go, you tune up the car. Yes, you get the alignment as perfect as you can on the car, but then you need to go drive it and kind of wire in that new range of motion. But there's also one big caveat that I wanted to say, that what we're talking about, that the average person shouldn't be doing all this like, foam rolling and mobility work. They should be focusing on the big compound lifts through a full range of motion. That is true for the average person. But what I learned when I was coming out of my FAI thing is that my body, aka my car, was so out of alignment that I actually needed to go through a phase, a period where I needed to do a lot of tuning up of that car before it was actually ready to drive. So I looked like the weird guy in the gym who was always doing all this mobility work with bands and massage and stretching and all this stuff. But I just learned through mindful experience that if I didn't do that and then I went to squat or snatch or deadlift heavy, my hips weren't symmetrical, and that put a weird stress on my SI joint, my low back, and it just didn't work for me. So I actually needed it, and some people might also need to go through a phase where they restore some symmetry in their hips and ankles before they try putting too much fitness on top of that, because asymmetrical hip and ankle mobility, and then putting squats and heavy deadlifts and stuff like that on top of that is a recipe for disaster. So there are exceptions to some people who may need to do some more mobility work, but it shouldn't just be like dumb, blind foam rolling on your quads and back for like an hour. It should be more precise to what you're trying to improve.
Yeah. Hey, do you mind if we pause for a second? I need to use the restroom real quick.
Absolutely.
Sweet. Yeah. Thanks, man. All right. So... yeah, I think a big deal that people, a big mistake that I made, and I think this relates directly to you, is, we talked a little bit about the internet, and people, they see a lot of stuff on the internet and they don't really actually know how to do it. And a big mistake that I made is when I first got on Instagram, I started following all these accounts of like, super fit people doing crazy stuff. Obviously, they look amazing. And, it started to seep into my brain that, that's the way I should look. Those are the things that I should be doing. And it kind of gave me a little bit of a complex of, I don't look good enough, or I'm not strong enough, or whatever, And then, luckily I recognized that, and I started to unfollow some of those accounts, and I started to follow other accounts that were still fitness related, but focused a lot on proper mechanics. And, you can find online, such as, YouTube channels like yours, people that are, will go through the nitty gritty detail in very short, digestible videos, about how to do a proper squat. And, they give great advice about, cues that you can look out for that maybe you're doing something wrong, or even that you're doing something right, and so, getting out of that sort of headspace of, I don't know, maybe you follow too many CrossFit people and you're, that's great if it motivates you to do something, but try to balance it out with people that are, trying to give you good advice, not just look good for you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's to me, I think that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge problem that a lot of people have, is that they see this stuff online. They think that's what I should be doing. I should be able to do that. Or if I do that, I'm going to look like him or her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not the case. You don't have their lifestyle. It's not going to, and if you do get to that point, it's going to take a long time for you to get there. You're going to have to really make some big changes. And maybe that's what you need, but take some time to find people that know what the hell they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Online, and listen to those people. Listen to Shane.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to you. Go to your YouTube. Watch some of your YouTube videos, and then once you get that stuff down, then go follow those other accounts and say, all right, I'm gonna go do some sort of snatch complex CrossFit style, and superset it with kip ups and all sorts of crazy crap.
Yeah, it's tricky to know. One, to have the self-awareness to know your own limits, and to know that everything in life is on a spectrum, meaning that, don't think that you can move and squat and lift like that 18-year-old CrossFit champion when you're a 45-year-old desk worker who has been inactive for many, many years. It's important to know your limits and have
or even you don't have to be a 45-year-old desk worker. You can just be an 18-year-old somewhat sedentary person.
Yeah.
Or, a high school athlete. I mean, it's, these people that make it to that level of, physicality, of physique, of fitness. I mean, they put in, a lot of it's genetics, of course. It's a lot of it's genetics, and a lot of it's hard work. And maybe you have the genetics, but you haven't put in the hard work yet, or maybe you have the hard work, but you don't have the genetics. But self-awareness, I think, is going to be key.
Yeah, and it's easy to say self-awareness, but how do you actually cultivate that? For me, meditation is a huge part of my life, and it really helped me to get a little bit of distance, because I was an Olympic weightlifting coach in a gym, surrounded by all these fit, young, amazing people, and plenty of, not fit, not young people. But being in that context, in that setting, there is a certain sense of social pressure to look like that guy, lift like that guy, move like that person. And when I started meditating more, I got a bit of perspective on the situation I was in and myself, and realized what's important to you, Shane? Is it having the heaviest snatch in the gym, the best clean and jerk, or is it to have a healthy body, a healthy organism? And when I was really honest with myself, I was like, well, I only get this one body for the rest of my life. So yeah, my priority is not to lift the most or look the fittest. It's to be functional, and yes, of course, look good. Why not look good as well? But more important than that was to feel good and to move well. So I backed off on the extremely heavy 1-rep maxes and focused on a more sort of holistic, well-rounded approach that included some stretching, some massage, some strengthening, some fun things like snatching and cleaning, and some of the crazy stuff that you do in the gym. That's fun too, but having the self-awareness to know my limits, and the self-awareness to say, I don't have to compete with anyone. It's an ego trip. It's not important for me.
Yeah, there's the ego thing. I think especially with men, in the gym of, searching for that 1 rep max and trying to be the person that lifts the most. And I think it sets people up for disaster, just like the average person, because there's always going to be someone stronger than you. It's not likely that you're going to be the strongest guy in the gym. And maybe you thrive on that competition, and that's cool. But, letting go of your ego and trying to figure out what is actually important. And I would think that longevity is going to be important. The most important. I would hope it is, at least, because I know right now I'm not the strongest guy in the gym. I'm fairly strong comparatively, but I know that if I keep it up at this pace, then when I'm 40, 34 now, when I'm 40, when I'm 50, when I'm 60, if I'm still doing these things, and hopefully I will be, if I do things right, then I will probably be the strongest 50-year-old, the strongest 60-year-old. And I mean, even then, I maybe there will be someone else that's stronger than me, but that's okay. I'm still like, there's something to be said about that accomplishment of taking care of yourself long enough to where you have, decades under your belt. And yeah, whatever, there's going to be some 20-year-old that's, blowing you out of the water on bench press, but he's only 20, and what does he actually know? You know what I mean? Like I'll have that wisdom under me,
Yeah.
And I think that's, to me, that's more important. And maybe that's just as I've aged, maybe that's just something that you don't, that knowledge, or that, not that I'm some sort of sage wise man, but it's just something that all people will get as they get older. I don't know. But it is frustrating to see people, push their bodies to extremes, chasing something that's not going to satisfy them. That is actually not as important as they think it is.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I have that long-term view as well, where I want to be the 60-year-old who is squatting like much heavier than you'd expect a 6-year-old to be squatting, but relative to the 18-year-old, it's like, okay, grandpa, you're squatting, 225 pounds. Like I squat 405 or whatever. Like, but have you ever seen like a 60-year-old with joints that move well, doing a nice solid form back squat, or, like a light medium snatch or something like that. And then you see him go and stretch, and he's like practically doing the splits, or is doing the splits, or doing like a really good back bridge or a back bend. Like that's the kind of well-rounded old man that I want to be. But but I think that most people don't realize that that's a good goal to go for, because they still think they're kind of invincible. And it usually takes some traumatic back injury like what I had, or some really big moment of pain for people to snap out of it and be like, oh, I need to start caring more about biomechanics. I need to start caring more about mobility. I need to start caring more about moving well, not just lifting lots of weights or going faster or getting a better Metcon time or whatever. Yeah.
You're not a professional athlete. You're not getting paid for this. Right. Like there's no benefit to hurting yourself.
Yeah.
A better Metcon results or whatever, that's great if there's a potential for you getting a $40 million contract, but it's bullshit if there's nothing in it for you.
Right.
If the only thing is that you're going to be able to say, yeah, I sprinted faster than you or whatever, that's cool. I mean, but who cares?
Right.
I want to know that you can sprint faster than me and keep sprinting faster than me, going forward in the long term.
Right.
And then I'll give you a round of applause.
Yeah.
Until you show me that $1 million contract. And so you go to the gym a lot, and you're a trainer, and you do a lot of different stuff. How do you feel about people doing curls in the squat rack?
You should be kicked out of the gym immediately. What do you mean?
Your gym membership is revoked.
Yeah.
It was a long time. It had been a very long time since I'd seen someone do that. And this past month, I've seen like 3 people do it. And it's very frustrating, especially at a busy time. I feel like I should say something like, hey, this, guy, step out.
I'm expecting to see a lot of that, because I just signed up for, I have like a small weight set here in my gym, but I realized this thing weighs like max 120 pounds or something. And so I was like, I need a little bit more. So I signed up for the commercial gym right next to my girlfriend's work. And so I'm expecting to see a lot of curling in the squat rack.
Your wife's work,
Yeah.
not your girlfriend.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome. I don't want her to hear this and then start asking you questions.
Sorry, honey.
Well, I'm trying to be cognizant of the time here. Is there something that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover? I mean, I'm sure we could talk about a lot of different stuff.
No, I think one of the things that I'm just most passionate about is teaching people how to fix their own injuries and how to improve their mobility and flexibility. And the biggest kind of gift that I want to give people is not just the realization, but actually the practiced skill that you can learn how to become like the best healer of your own body, because everyone's going to encounter, like, I don't know what the statistics are. It's like 80% of people and they'll have back pain in their life, or it's crazy. Like everyone's got some kind of pain. I can't think of a single person that I know that doesn't have a bum knee or a bad shoulder or a bad back or whatever. But normally if someone has a problem of some injury or pain in their body, the only option is like go run to someone else to fix it. A chiropractor, a physical therapist, a doctor, get a surgery, get a pill, get a shot, get an injection, get a magic adjustment or whatever. And there's this whole other world called self-care, called mobility, called you can fix your own injuries. And that's kind of what I'm aiming to spread the message about. So people can go check out my YouTube channel or my website and learn how to do 90% of the injuries that you might encounter in your life are fixable on your own if you just learn the skills. So that's what I'm hoping to give people.
I agree. I think that's great advice. Being able to educating people to take care of themselves and using those outside resources as a last resort, I think is a great way to encourage longevity in fitness.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Shane Dowd with gotrom.com and thefaifix.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
The views expressed on this show are those of the host or hosts and the guests, and sometimes differ from those of People's RX. While educational, the Cultivate Wellness Podcast is not meant to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. Please consult with your physician or healthcare provider before making any changes that may affect your health. If you have any comments, concerns, or suggestions, please email us at media@peoplesrx.com.